Hello, everybody. I'm so happy you could join us today for this Navigating Banking DSP Challenges Privacy Pack dialogue presented to you by your allies at Spirion and Infolock. I'm Tony Napolillo with Spirion, your host today, along with a panel of experts. And for the next 45 minutes, we're going to have a great discussion on what banking institutions can do to better secure their information. Joining me today, we have Sean Steele, co-founder of Infolock. Hello, Sean.
Hello.
And Fred Hamilton, CISO at BHG Financial. Hello, Fred.
Good afternoon.
And my friend and colleague from Spirion, Ryan Tully, who is our Chief Product Officer. Hello, Ryan.
Hey, Tony.
So I've gathered together these cybersecurity experts who are particularly knowledgeable in the financial industry. We're going to run through a series of topics, and then we're going to answer your questions, which you can submit anytime using the Q&A button at the top. So without further delay, we're going to start with our first topic, which I'm going to send to you, Ryan. What is data security posture management, and what is it not? Can organizations just implement DSPM and avoid data loss prevention, DLP, and tagging initiatives?
Sure. And so I'll start this off with a little bit of the generic answer, as in not necessarily tied to financials and such. But DSPM, and a little bit of background, it was a term that was first coined by Gartner in, I want to say it was his 2022 hype cycle for data security. And it's coming along as an evolution, so to speak, from cloud security posture management. But the overall concept of this is that DSPM as a phrase, is what it's meant to be, is a series of tools and techniques, not a product, but tools, techniques, and technologies and processes that are focused on reducing data-related risk as a component of an enterprise data security program. So what does that really mean? It means that it's a way to sit back and say, at the core of everything an organization really needs to care about, it's the very first part of it, the starting point, is understanding and identifying where data exists within the ecosystem, and not necessarily putting together a set of blanket statements or a blanket set of controls across everything that exists in hopes that it's going to cover what it is that you're looking for. A brief example on that one is as you go through different challenges, say I wanted to put through 15 different rubber stamps on a piece of paper to access any piece of data in my organization, regardless of whether or not it's the lunch list for the day, or it's a list of every single employee and their social security number. Eventually, people are going to get tired of those different practices and policies and security concerns that are in place for everything, and go find alternatives. Leads to shadow IT, leads to shadow data, leads to all sorts of messes outside of an organization's security posture that they want to have. By identifying the right data and putting together the right controls, the right identification, the right processes associated with that, and the right risk mitigation and understanding, that's going to help you control what matters most within an organization. So at its core, it's not a thing that you buy. You don't go out and say, I'm buying a DSPM today, or I'm building a DSPM today. You're going through and saying, I'm looking at a program, a set of frameworks, a set of things that I want to implement as an organization to focus on the security about my data and how I want to go through and implement that in the enterprise.
All right, great. And now that we understand a little more about what it is and what it is not, Sean, maybe you could take this one. What are the most significant DSP challenges currently facing the banking industry, and how can institutions overcome them? And then Fred, would love your perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think, some of the challenges that we see are a little bit around what DSPM is and how it fits into the ecosystem. DLP, as we were just talking about, has been around for a long time. And, many of the issues that DLP historically has had revolve around the fact that you're getting a tool to what Ryan was just talking about. You get a tool to maybe solve a first level regulatory use case challenge. And then you're left really holding this bag and saying, well, what comes next? What do I do now? So it's a little bit of the challenge would be beyond the very first use case that motivates acquiring DSPM as it is with DLP and other technologies. You have to look at really what are you trying to achieve as an organization long term? What are your objectives? And how do they influence and spring from your business objectives in planning. If you don't do that, what you have effectively from the very outset is a DSPM implementation that's orphaned. It's really a child with no parents, and it sort of wanders in the desert until it finds things to do. And that's really not a very smart, nor is it efficient, nor is it cost-effective way to go about it. So really for us, the governance and planning that comes before or right at the onset of a DSPM project is critically important. It's the biggest challenge that banking and financial services institutions have with this.
And Fred, as a CISO in the financial industry, what's your take?
I really wholeheartedly agree with the idea that you need a good governance strategy before you go into it. The fact of the matter is nowadays, I think for most of us in the financial industry, a lot of times I feel like we're actually becoming big data companies when you think about the amount of data it takes in order to really have some kind of successful financial risk management strategies, right? Like gone are the days where financial companies like myself only look at things like credit scores and stuff like that. That is so 2021, right? And so nowadays we're using more and more data. So I think a lot of companies, especially if you're new to this, what ends up happening is we've got data pretty much spread across the four corners of the company. And so having a good strategy, doing some good, having a good strategy, figure out what you're really trying to do and what you're actually trying to protect, I think is really critical here. And so I really think Sean's 100% right. The challenges are, how do I get my hands around all this growing amount of data? And really the way you do that is with a good strategy at the beginning, but giving yourself plenty of flexibility, because as you turn over more rocks, there's going to be a lot of shit coming out that but there's a lot of stuff coming out that you may or may not be expecting.
All right, let's keep. Yeah, go ahead.
So I will echo to that too. In terms of what we've seen from this side of the house, where these challenges are, is deploying any sort of strategy to help you manage your data really comes down to your three major areas: people, process, technology. This is nothing net new for people. But going through and defining what that plan is, what the process actually is before you implement the actual DSPM strategy is to echo both of these two. It's paramount. It's the number one thing that you have to be able to do, to be able to sit back and say, I am putting my strategy in place in a way that's going to be successful, as compared to going through and putting on paper, we need to do this DSPM thing, and then slap a piece of software and play, and then walk away and cross your fingers and hope for the best.
Yeah, and I'll say real quickly, operationally, there's a real underestimation of the amount of human effort that's required to make sense of what these very capable DSPM solutions turn over and come back with. You do your first scan, and in many cases, I think organizations are blown away with the level of insight that they have. Now, data-driven and informed decision-making is great when you have the data, but you still have to do the decision-making. And if you haven't really talked about how that goes down and who's involved, it can be paralyzing for people.
Yeah, and what's your goal and why are you doing it, right? Like, are you doing this just because you want to secure your PII, or are you actually trying to meet some of the privacy regulations that are coming out? What do we got? We got what? By last count, I think in June 2024, we had 18 states who are coming up with their own privacy regulations. So think about it from that perspective, and not all of them are the same. And we got more and more coming. And so, I think part of that strategy has got to be, what are we trying to fix? And if we're trying to fix that, that might be different than just simply trying to protect that data.
Yeah.
That's a great point too, in terms of, this is effectively the intersection of compliance and privacy in this regards, right? Compliance in terms of maybe we're looking at PCI DSS or something to those regards, but privacy itself, not just the states domestically, but any sort of institution that's going to be engaging in an international focus or is spreading out into an international space. You now have, gosh, what was the last statistic? Something like 85% of all the countries out there have some sort of privacy regulation or in the effort of going and putting one into play. It's relatively significant in ensuring that you're going and you're managing the data, and more specifically identifying that data before you can put that management piece in play.
Yeah, not for nothing, the United States is not one of those countries that has federal preemption for privacy. So hopefully someday that happens.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, as kind of as a CISO in a financial industry, I certainly hope so, because because where are we all left? We're all left with basically a patchwork of stuff across the states. So good luck.
Yeah.
Please, I need the good luck. So.
All right, let's continue down the rabbit hole. And Ryan, I'd like you to start us off on this one. Gen AI is exploding in popularity. What does the banking sector need to do to prepare for Gen AI adoption and transformation? This is a hot topic. Everyone's talking about Gen AI. How does it tie into DSPM, especially around banking?
And I'll give the more generic response here and let these other two drill into it for the whole banking and financial aspect. But Gen AI is just the coolest technology out there in terms of the modern days, and generating information and concatenating data that's put into it and generating an output and really helping with productivity. It's neat. It's cool. As a technologist, I love it. As a privacy and security person, I'm terrified of it. So Gen AI at the end of the day is really just another vector for data loss. OWASP came out with their top 10 list of things that are associated with Gen AI and how people can go and start extracting information from this that they shouldn't be getting, ranging all the way from just prompt configuration, the right prompt configuration, all the way down to knowing the tips and the tricks to get into the system and start outputting the right information that they want to receive, even if the system is designed not to give that information out. All that comes down to one of the scariest parts. If you're going to be training a system, right, you want to build your own LLM or an SLM if you have a unique use case that you have internally, or something in between. If you want to start building that out, and part of that involves feeding data to the system, the recognition has to be in play that any data that goes into the system is data that can come out of the system. More specifically, too, it's data that can come out of the system with a line drawn, a vector drawn between two disparate pieces of data that may or may not be subject to a form of regulation or subject to a form of privacy. So if you're importing any information, even if it's not explicitly regulatorily controlled, so example, if I have let's say I have a number that's a 9-digit number, could be a social, not a social, but I feed it into my LLM as part of additional data sets that I have, and the system is able to generate a recognition between that data point and someone's name, we have a risk that's associated with that, right? It's just an arbitrary example over there. So really one of those big risks is what is going in to your system as you're going through and training it? Is it actually Gen AI ready? And are you going to be practicing responsible generative AI in terms of training these models in such a way where the data set is useful and functional for your business rather than the overall generic piece? Right now, that's a recent survey said about 56% of IT professionals are saying that is the biggest concern. Data security and privacy for what goes in versus what comes out, and how you control and how you regulate access to that information.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Sean, that he's saying that Gen AI can be a real tool for protecting data, but also a real threat.
It is, and with great power comes great responsibility, right? I was presenting at a banking conference this summer in Baltimore, and I got a lot of questions about how quickly banks and financial services firms, there were some credit unions there, should be thinking about moving from the sort of limited edge use cases that they're exploring right now in, Copilot or with other tools that are commonly available. How quickly they should move from that to a full enterprise rollout. And I said, listen, I can't tell you what your risk tolerance should be, but much like Ryan just said, if you roll this out, it's not going to be nearly as useful as it could be without your specific and proprietary information plugged into it. Maybe that needs to be scrubbed and it really needs to be secured first, but it needs to be flavored to you, right? Not just generic. But number two, users are going to start to do things with it that you can't begin to imagine or to predict. And you just really need to move very slowly and very methodically. One area that you could do this in is obviously with DSPM and with discovery and classification and tagging and labeling. Clean out the attic, clean up the basement, if you will, with data before you start to load up any sort of language model that stands behind a Gen AI tool. And, finally, I would say that proprietary Gen AI mechanisms and platforms can be much safer and I think a much better bet. And honestly, something that you should fork up pretty big money for than going with something that's sort of open to the masses bidirectionally.
Oh yeah, open to the masses bidirectionally is where all the terror comes from, right? That that Ryan was already talking about. Because again, because if it's open to the masses and it's bidirectional, then you are part of the model. And so, with that, it was already kind of hinted at, but the results are just so unpredictable and you don't really know where they're going to come up and why they're coming up. And so, you really cannot predict a lot of these things. So what we're doing in order to prepare for some of this stuff is I directed our team to start with basically a lot of AI governance. So we began early. We got a lot of AI governance going in place because what does that do for us? It helps us create the strategy ahead of time because that's part of the go slow and the low and slow kind of the crawl, walk, run method, right? And I don't know if we're ever going to really run, but what we can at least do is make sure we're kind of prepared for stuff that happens. Part of that governance program is going to be working groups. So not only do you have the governance group, but you also have some of the experts involved, as much as there are any in this nascent technology so far, that can get together and say, what do we think can be used for? How do we go ahead and get this stuff set up? What are the risks and what are not? And by being super thoughtful about it, we're probably going to reduce some of those risks. That's the hope.
Yeah,
I have one
like-
question for Fred, real quick. Sorry to step over you guys. What are you seeing in terms of guidance from the regulators and auditors, Fred, when it comes to Gen AI governance? Are you getting much good guidance at this point?
No, what you get is a lot of questions. I was just talking to my regulators actually in the past couple of weeks, and they're asking, what do you guys got going on with AI? Are you using AI? And they don't really know what to do with it yet. And that's also a little bit nerve-wracking because, there's nothing like regulators coming after you set up a strategy. But to tell you did it wrong. But at the end of the day, I think they're caught flat-footed, frankly.
Yeah, I was going to say, Fred, that it sounds like there's reason to be fearful of it, but as we proceed forward, especially as a CISO, you have to be careful, but you have to start embracing this technology if you want to stay ahead of the ball.
Absolutely. I mean, really, when you think about it, what is Action Information Security Program's actual goal? It's to empower the business to move forward securely, not to slow it down. So you got to get ahead of these things in order to really kind of make sure, because we know that the business is going to have use cases for this. We know it, we get requested for it, and we know there's a lot of opportunity there. So my goal is to say, I know there's going to be a lot of requests. Let's do it safely. Let's not slow the business down. Let's use it to empower the business, but let's do it as safely as possible.
I'll echo on Fred's point there too, is if you sit back and you have a blanket statement, and we've seen multiple organizations run into this, the blanket statement is AI is just not available. There's too much concern around it. There's security issues that need to be figured out and put in play. And if that's the blanket statement, people will find a way to use it. They'll go around it. They'll start pumping information into things like ChatGPT and Copilot that they necessarily shouldn't be doing, and all of a sudden it becomes a problem. If you aren't thinking ahead of time that I need to figure out, maybe I generate a center of excellence or something like that internally for how are we building out this governance strategy? How are we figuring out how we feed this? How are we figuring out how this is utilized? Do we use some of these next-gen firewalls to get into the browser itself and stop it? All of these are questions that need to be answered, but they need an answer. And if the answer is just no across the board, people go around it, and you go back into that whole shadow IT, shadow data, and the exfiltration of data as it starts making its way out into the wild.
Yeah, and these are pernicious, right? I mean, it's well-meaning people doing things that they don't imagine could come back to hurt them. I mean, you can imagine somebody that's drafting or revising or editing a sensitive strategy document or, God forbid, an HR enforcement action. And you know how it works? Cut and paste, hey, ChatGPT, can you take this and reword it so it's clearer and easier to understand? Right? And that's the level which they think about what they're doing. They don't think, oh, I just gave the internet effectively our sensitive information, maybe names, addresses, social security numbers, really maybe sensitive details about whatever they're working on. So it's pernicious.
All right, I
Earnings
think we could have
statements.
an entire webinar on AI, but we have a lot to cover. So unless there's something else you have to say, we're going to move on. All right, and just a reminder, we'll be taking your questions soon, so get those in up at the Q&A button at the top. All right. Hey, Fred, I think this one's a good one for you. How can financial institutions effectively prioritize their DSPM initiatives within their broader cybersecurity and compliance strategies?
I guess in some ways there's a generic answer to that as well, because it's the same way you handle a lot of things. But basically, the way we do things is risk-based. So what we do is we do risk-based assessments across a lot of different platforms, and especially around data and stuff. So what we are able to do by doing that is we're able to find out where's our most riskiest data, what's going on with that, and then we can use that as part of our prioritization to get it moved along. So again, there's a certain amount of governance in there. I think the G word's being used a lot in this call, but I really think that that's where I would start, right?
Yeah, our advisory consultants, and it's baked into a lot of the other types of services that we deliver, managed and professional. DSPM is a tool or tooling or mechanisms that support data risk indexing and business unit level data risk assessments and other sort of core and essential risk management processes. So if you think about it in those terms, it becomes much clearer, and I think better to slot it into the rest of your controls.
Most of us have a data protection strategies, especially if you're in a bank or you're in the financial sector. You've already got a lot of regulatory stuff around data protection anyways, right? And so I think that can also help kind of slot that in.
All right. Thank you. Moving on, 5. Ryan, why don't you tackle this one first? As the digital landscape evolves, what future trends do you predict will shape the role of DSPM in banking? We talked about AI, but how about outside of AI or in conjunction with?
I was going to say that's a tricky one to answer there, Tony, because the answer is AI. That's the future trend we're looking at for everything. And there's a couple categories of AI realistically. There's our everyday AI, which is where Gen AI is really falling, your ChatGPTs and your copilots. And there's more of your transformative AI, the utilizing artificial intelligence, machine learning, the newer innovations that are in play to start rethinking and reevaluating what's going on out there in the world. And some of these and I'll use a quote for a moment here that I'm stealing from somebody with no attribution because I forget who it was at a conference for RSAC. But the idea was that ChatGPT, these systems, they're English majors, they're not math majors. They're really good at going through and taking text and data and concatenating them, putting together in a great expanse. But a lot of what you run into in financial is also the numbers, is understanding things not just like what do you actually have in terms of numbers, because it's financial, of course, but risk and quantitatively identifying a lot of different areas and concerning yourself where these things are going to be. Right now, from a pure Gen AI point of view and that text-based output, it's excellent. It's incredible. The AI in terms of identification and things in a quantitative way, it can be challenging. Somebody already on the call mentioned that unpredictable is the output in times, right? A neural network is not necessarily meant to always go ahead and return the exact same result 2 times in a row. So as we go through and we start tweaking that and we modify and we update what the AI systems are out there to help us with quantification, better understanding of what it is that goes into it and coming out of it from a pure quantitative perspective, that's going to really help drive additional data-driven decisions going downstream. I think that what we're going to see as a result of that is as more evolution occurs, it's more regulation. The outside regulators are going to step in and say that this is becoming a challenge. At what point does a human need to have oversight into this overall process? At what point should a human not have oversight into the overall process? And where do we draw the line between traditional algorithm-based identification and between AI? Because you run into hallucinations, you run into those types of concerns. So overall, I know that there's things outside AI, but I think AI is going to be that bigger change that we see going forward in terms of everything and how people are going to respond to it and how institution regulation is going to respond to that.
Great. And Sean, what do you think? Where do you think it's heading?
Well, I mean, I think one trend that's really difficult, and at the outset, I think that you said it well. Data is exploding, and exponential doesn't even necessarily, in some cases, describe it. When we think about the Internet of Things and the amount of telemetry and the amount of just spin-off data that is coming at us as enterprises, we need tools and technologies and processes and mechanisms that simply haven't existed. I can tell you, having been in information governance for more than 25 years, it's shocking to me at some level that it's taken this long for there to be this much popular focus on the issue of coming to grips with data assets and what's actually in your data estate. I thought that would have happened 15, 20 years ago. And here we are in 2024. And it's really, this is still something that we're really on the cusp of for most organizations.
Have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that what the two gentlemen already said was right, but a little bit more on some of like the data and AI and the regulatory stuff. When you think about it, we're already there's no direct regulatory direction like we spoke about. But if you look at it indirectly, things like fair lending laws and a lot of these other things, human interaction is always going to be the name of the game, because you can't make decisioning in a fair way based off automation stuff when you don't know why the decisions are being made. So that's always going to be tricky. But again, I think another way of some of the future trends coming up again are all these privacy laws coming up. That's going to completely shape what we're doing with our data, what we're going to be expected to do with our data, the kind of controls we're going to be expected to have on that going forward is just going to go through the roof. And like you said, in just the sheer amount of data, it's just out of control, because those things are being used more and more for decisioning with AI or without.
And I'll even add it on the privacy piece, because I'll touch on that too, is as these continue to grow, a lot of people are commenting that the privacy regulations that are out there, they don't have teeth, because they put them down on paper, and sure, they have written down that there's going to be a fine, but who's doing it and where's it going, and how many times have we seen Google, for instance, hit like a handful over there? The moment these start being enforced, especially when they start being enforced broadly, everything is going to change. Because now you're no longer sitting back and saying there's a regulation out there and it's a best effort that we're going to do to make sure that we're following what this privacy requirement is. Now it's going to turn into, are you going to buy software to do this? Are you going to use AI to do this? Are you going to get attorneys to join your team and look at this? How are you going to cover 18 plus states domestically, not to mention everything internationally, when you know that there could be a financial or similar impact downstream from those activities that are going on? So not just as they exist and continue to grow, but as they start getting enforced, we're going to see more and more of a change.
All right. Thank you, guys. So we got a couple more topics we're going to cover. I'm seeing some questions come in, so I want to make sure we have time for that. We're going to move on to the next topic, which is for you, Sean. Maybe you could just give us a little brief rundown of Infolock and how does Infolock build and run data risk management programs for financial services and banks?
Sure, I'll keep this super short and sweet. I don't, certainly don't want to make this into a commercial for us, but data risk management is the way we discuss the larger issues around governance, visibility, and protection, as well as utilization. So Gen AI at the end of that process is really where we've been with a lot of these questions. But and governance is what we've been talking a lot about with planning and prep and getting your requirements and your objectives aligned with the business. But in the middle of that, the visibility and protection mechanisms, organizations really struggle. In some cases, what we find is the DPO, the data protection officer, the CISO, other concerned parties in the GRC organization, they can give the same message that an organization like us would provide, and no one will listen or really take them seriously. But if they are able to engage with an outside firm that's seen this in their peers and in a lot of different ways, that message, just because it's a different messenger, can really be heard, understood, and implemented. So that's what we do. We build full, sustainable, and pretty swampy and detailed, to be quite honest with you, just data risk management programs. And that includes DSPM and DLP and encryption and privacy and all of those different pieces that you might think it does downstream.
Great. Thanks for letting us know about that. And if you have any questions, let's get those in now, because I'm going to go one more to Ryan, and then we're going to take Q&A. You could put it in the Q&A button at the top. I see some people also using the chat. Q&A button would work best. How does Spirion's privacy-grade approach to data discovery and classification stand out from other DSPM solutions, especially in handling sensitive banking data?
So to echo the idea, not to sound like a commercial necessarily here, but let's talk about this in terms of DSPM. What's your first letter in that acronym? It's D, it's data. It's the most important thing. And if you don't know what your data is or where it is or the sensitivity or the information that's associated with it, it's really hard to do the rest of it. And as I mentioned earlier, doing a blanket approach to how you manage and you secure your data just has more pitfalls down the road, especially when it's an overly prescriptive approach or a restrictive approach too, as compared to going through and just focusing on what matters. Realistically, Spirion, with the accuracy that we have, industry leading 98.5% accuracy on identifying sensitive information across almost any repository you can think of or file type, it's the starting point, right? It's genuinely your step one for going through and doing anything from a data security posture management. Find your data, find it accurately, find some level of automation once you're confident and comfortable that you're not getting false positives or a false positive rate is relatively low, and then action on it from there and build the rest of your security posture management program around that. So Spirion will help you be that step one in identifying your sensitive information.
All right, thank you, Ryan. We're going to go to Q&A now. We do have a couple in here. Hey, Fred, I'm going to let you handle this because you are a CISO and you have a robust DSPM framework in place. DSPM has become a magic vendor buzzword. Seems like everyone has a DSPM offering, quote unquote. When vetting solutions, how do you separate the marketing fluff from actual innovation? Great question.
Oh yeah, that's a tricky one, right? Our RSA conference was already mentioned and stuff like that, and I think I probably talked to 3 or 4 different vendors out there. Just to make it, I just want to make it abundantly clear. I am actually a Spirion customer, just so to get that kind of qualification out of the way. But the reason why I am is because of some of the things I had to look at in order to go through. And one of the most important things was everyone kind of offers automation, but a lot of times that automation isn't really very complete, right? And that's one of the things that I had to look at, because right now, when I look at kind of the information security staffing crunch that most of us are in, I needed something that was going to be easy to manage and was actually going to be truly automated and not need to have 30 different integrations that I then had to purchase separately and then try to kludge together to make work. And some of the customers and some of the different kind of companies I looked at were doing that. And so so one of the things that was really important to me as I kind of moved forward in this was what can find all the data, but then what can actually take automation and what can actually take automatic kind of responses to that built on all the rules we did. Does it remove the data? Does it actually remove the whole file? Does it just redact the sensitive parts? And that's all part of the strategy that you have to come up with. But you have to have a tool that can be flexible enough to do that. And that's one of the things that was really kind of tricky to go through. So you have to do a lot of due diligence, sit through a lot of meetings, cut through a lot of BS, because there's a lot of it out there, because I mean, you call it marketing fluff, but it is what it is. And so that was really important for us. And I think we found the right one for us, but it was definitely hard to do.
That's great insight, Fred. Here's another one that I think that would be good for you. What do you feel the adoption rate of the nascent technology, as Fred phrased it, within banking? How do you feel the time to value of such a concept aid in organizations as they align to PCI 4.0 efforts of getting certified and staying in that happy state?
Yeah, so when I used the word nascent technology, I was speaking specifically in the AI area, but due to the phrasing of that question with the word PCI in there, I think it might also just be for just the data strategy in general, right? And I think that actually, if you talk about time to value on organizations as they try to do their PCI, there's a lot of time involved, but the value is incredible. Because frankly, if you don't know where all your PCI data is, good luck getting a QSA and good luck getting the scope down. Good luck actually being able to fully you'll be able to do it, but how really complete will you be as you go through getting ready for PCI, right? How do you do that if you don't know where all your data is? And, using a lot of automation is going to help you quite a bit, but having a really good strategy involved is really going to be critical for that. I think there's a lot of time, but the value's there. For us, it's a no-brainer.
And Fred, I would say, if we draw a parallel with basic cybersecurity hygiene, it's very difficult for an enterprise to protect what they've got and be ahead of the threat model that's out there, which is ever evolving, if they don't have a basic hardware asset registry and understanding. And so the same goes for the data world. And, especially if you're looking for PCI information, pretty hard to put in controls if you don't even know at a baseline where that information resides.
Oh yeah, and if you don't tie that data inventory in with your CMDB, so you don't, you're kind of hamstringing yourself. Like those things have to go hand in hand.
Ryan, you have anything to add?
Only to comment on that, especially tying your inventory in your CMDB. And if you take a look at some of the most common compliance frameworks out there, you'll see in the first few questions, do you have a data asset inventory? And if you're not going through and actually inventorying everything you have and managing it in that appropriate way, it becomes a real challenge to identify things. And it's not just the asset inventorying, it's also going through and to Fred's point, making sure you know where that PCI is or any data that's sensitive and tying it back to those assets and having different controls associated with that. So all the same stuff we've already heard, but I'm sitting back and saying I'm fully in agreement.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions. So what I want to do is end it with your final thoughts here. Sean, you had said that Gen AI is a game changer. You want to reiterate what you meant?
Yeah, we covered this in some detail. I mean, Gen AI, it's hard to argue that this is the biggest thing since sliced bread, really, in our industry. And, you're not going to have the best Gen AI or very good Gen AI if you don't customize the language modeling behind it. And to do that, you really have to understand what assets to feed it and why, and whether that's okay, and have a program around that. And it's very difficult without DSPM, without being able to discover all the data, to keep that a continuous effort, and to then really be able to classify and label it appropriately. So Gen AI, great. There's something that's got to really happen first. And I think that we're, as an industry, at that first part and not yet at the full embrace of Gen AI.
All right, thank you, Sean. Fred, you had said that now is time to move forward. What did you mean?
Well, regardless of where you are in your data security or data protection, or the DSPM, journey, now's the time to keep moving forward on that. If you haven't started one, you need to get ahead of it now, because we've talked about some of these other technologies are coming online. Gen AI is one where you have to really know what data you have. Someone else already mentioned things such as, regulatory or compliance stuff like PCI or any regulatory you have. And regardless of where you are, this is a never-ending journey. You are never going to have your data protected and you're done and you can walk away and go have a drink. That's not going to happen because, as we already discussed about it, the volume of data is just growing. So your strategy is going to have to continue to evolve. So regardless of where you are in your journey, I really encourage you, keep moving on it or get started right away. There are some vendors that you can reach out to. We've already heard from one. There's a lot of tools out there, but I really encourage you to get moving on this if you haven't already. And if you think you're doing well, you're probably not doing well enough, and keep going.
I think that's a great point, Fred. Data protection is not a destination, but it's a journey. You have to always stay ahead, because if you don't, someone's going to get in. Someone's going to find your data if you aren't staying ahead of them.
Yep.
Ryan, you said DSPM is a framework to use as a guide. It's not necessarily a product, but a framework. Explain that.
Yeah, and I mentioned this a bit at the beginning too when talking about DSPM, but you don't, as an organization, walk out there and say, I bought a DSPM, check the box and move on. right? It's a set of tools, techniques, technology, processes, procedures. It's everything all together to make sure that you're going through and you're having the right structure and the right implementation of the security of data within the organization, involving everything ranging all the way from short. Tools will support you. No one tool is going to do everything that falls under DSPM. You may have to end up using a couple of them, or you may need human intervention or people who come through with a lot of experience who show up and say, hey, this is how we're going to implement all these different parts of your business to make this work. But the short version of this is look at it as a framework, look at it as a guide, look at what your existing tools and technologies can actually support. What do you need to supplement to go and make sure that you check all the boxes that are associated with it? But rather than just checking the boxes to check them, make sure that it's all built into an overall strategy that aligns to what you're doing to protect what matters most within the organization. And that's the data, especially that data that is highly regulated and highly sensitive and highly personal and highly private.
Great
and I'll
point.
jump. That's such an important point. Sorry to step on you, Tony, but that's such an important point to make at this in this webinar. You know, DLP is such a cautionary tale for us as an industry. It is still a very useful set of technologies, but it failed because we didn't integrate it. We didn't think about it not as a destination, but as a journey and a process. So, yeah, that's such an important point that Ryan brings up here.
All right. Hey guys, I'm so thrilled with everything you just shared. I think that you've probably created many more questions that the attendees may have had. And I encourage everyone to go to Spirion.com or Infolock.com if you do have more questions on how to proceed. This was a Privacy Pack dialogue, navigating banking DSPM challenges. I thank our panelists for your expert advice and your insights. This webinar has been recorded and will be sent to everybody who has joined us today to view again or share within your organizations. Thank you again to our panelists and our audience for attending. Have a great day.